This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us one of the more erudite citizens in this part of the world, Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Greetings again.
Now, we generally start off by commiserating on your absence of position in Washington, but are you adjusting to that? I mean, you're here in Macon and not in the Capitol. Is that working out, or is it possible?
It's been rough, but I've managed to reconcile myself to a life here in Macon.
Well, okay. I mean, you know, it's certainly not impossible to put your head in the political arena. So don't let me hold you back.
I would not want to deprive Macon. Washington will just have to get along with that one. But what about your aspirations?
Well,
we were just talking about you're looking for new worlds to conquer.
Well, I'm happy here in Macon, Georgia, and so we can await, both of us can await Godot here, I think, satisfactorily. Well, on that note, a little levity. There are lots of things that we could discuss, and I will sort of bring this up. On some circles, particularly on that inclined toward the left, there's an idea out there about a guaranteed national income. In other words, the idea that everybody would get some amount of money, no matter what their circumstances were, whether they worked, whether they didn't work. And so there would be it allegedly would promote efficiency, civility. It would diminish tension titers. People would feel comfortable about their life. They'd be more secure. And this idea is touted in leftist circles, so much so that recently in the New York Times there was a piece advocating this idea. And looking around the world, one can say that in Cuba, for instance, there's a guaranteed national income. You'll get, I have to say, it's a pittance, but everyone gets a little money. And they're trying experiments in Finland also, where Helsinki, the capital city, the bear and the eagle got together recently, you could say. And the Finns are experimenting, and traditionally in a state like Alaska, if you're a citizen there, you got a check from the state government.
It's the oil money, yes.
Because of the oil money. Well, now, what do you think about it? I mean, do you have any thoughts? Is this a good idea or a bad idea? And there are advocates on the left that support it.
Well, it's not a new idea, interestingly enough. It's interesting to see, and once again, we were talking a little bit before we started rolling about odds and ends, and you were talking about you have a cyclical view of the world and of history, and nothing new under the sun. One thing that occurs to me is during the Great Depression, the 1930s, Huey Long, of course, the very famous, or one should say notorious Southern politician, came up with the idea of the Share Our Wealth plan. And his idea was simply to impose astronomical income taxes on the very wealthy, which would be sufficient to redistribute the wealth to the tune of around $5,000 per family per annum. And of course, this is 1930-ish dollars.
Yes.
That would be a very, very nice income for that period. It's a very nice idea. My initial reaction, of course, I'm not an economist, is that if everybody gets a floor amount, the prices and the general inflation is going to reflect that, and we're no better off than we were.
The idea about this is, I think, what we're sort of skating along is on income redistribution.
Yes.
So right now there is an enormous amount of income redistribution everywhere. I mean, the excesses of capitalism would be enough that if there was no income redistribution, there'd be really terrible circumstances. There'd be tremendous numbers of homeless people. There'd be actually maybe even starvation.
Yes.
But the system has a tremendous redistribution of wealth in the healthcare system and in entitlements. An enormous amount of things are happening now.
And many of those things actually do trace back to the 1930s as well as the 60s, when many people thought capitalism was on the ropes in the Western world or the United States in the 1930s. And there's a huge debate. Was FDR, was President Franklin Roosevelt, the author of the New Deal, was he a capitalist or was he not? Did he save capitalism or did he compromise it? But,
just so. So I guess we're sort of getting, we're sort of parsing the idea about guaranteed income. You could say that this redistribution has saved capitalism.
Yes.
So the idea is that people just could not accept the idea that some people were flying around in their private jet planes and other people were just in the gutter rolling around with the dogs and starving. I mean, that would be an unacceptable arrangement. Income redistribution accomplishes that. And the idea, I think the efficiency issue is what appeals to people in the left. So if you're going to basically give, your idea is to redistribute income. And the way that you're going about it is you're giving money to unwed mothers, or you're getting large disability payments. So presumably, if it would not be necessary to go that direction, and the argument also might be that some people they want more, and so they turn to crime to get additional money, and that would presumably prevent that. So there's an efficiency issue on that. Now you appropriately discussed the issue with inflation. I think the people on the left would say one of the things that happens is the taxes are going to be so inflated. The wealthier people are going to have to pay huge amounts of money to go into the system, and the tax rates would be so, I might use the word onerous, that there would not really be an inflation. There would not, because all of the wealthy people would not be they would not be basically consuming anything. Instead, they would be sending the money down to the poorer people. Now, that would be the argument about it, and if you looked into the ethics of it, you could say that in some ways it's a moral thing. If you have a lot to give some of what you have to other people, you could say that. And you could say the communist system might work that way. You could say communes work that way. Kibbutzes work that way, maybe in Israel. Now I'm going after making those cases, I'm going to let you hit the ball back. I mean, I'm sure you have some doubts about this idea.
Well, a few doubts. I do think that it just it cheapens the value of we'll say the dollar in this case, if we're talking the United States. Also, you mentioned collective societies, and this is speaking of the ethics. This is the last thing you brought up. It is once again, and I think we've talked about this before on this program, the difference between pronouns, I and you. I will give versus you will give. And that is the difference between individualism and collectivism. That if the individual wishes to give, to donate, that's one thing, but if we are all forced to give or to donate, that's another matter altogether. And I think that there would be some severe economic dislocations. I suppose it matters whether Keynes is looking at it or whether Friedman's looking at it, supply side, demand side. But I really can't believe that it's going to work out as well as I think any humanitarian and humane person would like for it to work out. Communism, socialism, democratic socialism is a beautiful idea. The problem is, does it work? Can it be made to work? And there are very few such systems on a large national scale throughout history where it has been made to work sustainably.
Yes, well, that's true enough. Now, you mentioned the word, I sort of mentioned it too, communism. So the idea is that after the Berlin Wall crashed and the Soviet Union disappeared and the Red China swung into the capitalist orbit, that really it doesn't exist anymore. But really the proponents of that system are just basically of another name, and the ideas are still there. And so many people imagine this is the best way to do it, that to make the world work in an optimal fashion would be to have some kind of system like that. And I would say there are a lot of arguments against it, which I'm holding myself back from making, but I want you to make them. But I'll just say that there is such a system in Cuba. Having gone there and visited Cuba, there's there's guaranteed food. So food is rationed. Everybody gets a certain amount of food, no matter what their circumstances are, and they get a certain amount of money, no matter what their circumstances are. The problem is it's a pittance, and it's not enough to stay alive. So if the government gave everyone $100, maybe that would be okay, I guess. The question is, how much money should be given, and is there a quid pro quo for receiving this money? So in other words, if you get money from the state, does that mean that you're a supplicant for the state, which is a sort of a problem with tyrants. So if you're a political figure and you're giving everyone money, and they're dependent on that money, and you want to secure their support, you might threaten to take the money away, or if they're good, you might give them more money. So it's a very powerful stick for the government to do this.
And you mentioned the efficiency category. Remember that you do have a middleman. If I wish to donate directly to an individual or directly to a charitable corporation, then you cut out the middleman. With the government, there's always going to be that third party, me to the government, to the recipient, and of course that's you have operating expenses, you have overhead, you have capital. So I find it interesting to apply the word efficiency to that arrangement. It's the same problem with workfare. Why not just arrange for private employers to do the hires directly and make it more efficient? And also, what happens if my idea is right and we do see inflation? We say $1,000 per month or whatever, and so the price of hamburgers at McDonald's or Burger King goes from $2.99 to $6.99 or $7.99. Well, the obvious fix would be to counteract that by raising the basic stipend to $2,000 a month. But do we get into a vicious cycle or not? What does the hamburger price do at that point? Does it go to $12.99 or not?
Well, what I'm really really what we've got here is sort of an ember of communism. It's an ember of communism. It's part of it's like a plane crashed in the desert, and this is the wing part of it, or some part of the destroyed system. The idea is that we'll do this, we'll pass this money around, and certainly there are lots of arguments against it. One of them is that people don't like anyone that's having money taken from them to give to another person, regardless of the person's merit. It's going to cause a lot of problems, and it's also going to be a disincentive for anyone to work. The other where this ship also sails is the idea that inflation is going to occur. Well, traditionally, what happens in a pure communist system is that or in some circumstances in Western capitalism, the government puts in price controls. So they would just say, well, we're going to just make this is what the hamburger cost, and that causes enormous inefficiency.
All it does is lock down the pressure cooker.
Well, it causes enormous inefficiency,
yes.
And some of the reason the Soviet system blew up was their arrangements did not maximize efficiency. So they had the system in place, and it just didn't work. I well remember in my travels, I was in Lithuania after the Soviet Union had cracked up, and I was talking to some Lithuanians just after the Russians and the communism left. How did it work, I asked, and they said, well, we pretended to work and they pretended to pay us. So it would be even no incentive at all to work. Although presumably the money would be such a small number, there'd be a lot of incentive to work. But that's the idea that's floating around, and it may well be an idea that surfaces as our country goes through its swings to the right and left. It certainly could happen.
Yes. Well, the price control, once again, price controls lock things down, and at some point, the lid will blow off the pressure cooker when things become inequitable and you can no longer support the thing. And that's how revolutions are made. And on top of that, when you talk in this direction, it's Margaret Thatcher's supposed quotation, the problem with socialism is that sooner or later you run out of other people's money. We're talking Ayn Rand type of objectivism here. We're talking the Laffer curve. At what point does the large income producer, the large supplier of jobs, simply say this is too complicated and too expensive, I'm just going to go to New Zealand and good luck America?
Well, I mean, millions of people, still, it would be a long time before that happens, just because the U.S. is it's the city on the hill, it's such an extraordinary place. There are 8 billion people on the planet, and the U.S. has 320, 330 million people, and everything is great here. So if 100,000 people went to New Zealand and the borders were open, there'd be millions of people, many of them very meritorious, that would flood into the country.
But if the 100,000 are the most intelligent, the hardest working, the best educated, I mean, this is what happened to East Berlin.
Yes. Well, you could ask the question too: what happened to the Imperial Russia? So all the White Russians fled. They went to Paris. They did this. They did that. But actually, the national strength of the place was it made substantial progress. I mean, the people that were the aristocrats and on the top of the world left. And then it was discovered the sergeants, the meritorious NCOs could be great generals, yes, so to speak. So the system was not allowing merit to come to the surface, yes, which many people would say would be a problem with the capitalist arrangements. And the money is kept in the hands of relatively few people, and made the climb up the slippery pole is very difficult.
Well, that's an interesting model, because it seems like the idea of a basic living stipend, for instance, or guaranteed income, would be to level the playing field. And yet you're saying that perhaps an unforeseen consequence would be to bring out more stellar performers in terms of talent, in terms of raw energy, that would be, I think, a good consequence, but perhaps an unintended one. And then the cycle begins anew, perhaps in 10 years or 50 years or 100 years.
Well, not to make it too complicated, but we have a very diverse country. We have millions of people that are newly arrived Americans. They're full of energy, full of great talents. Many of them are.
Yes. And
the system is trying to open every door for them. And as they open the door, they're closing doors for other people. So the question is, who gets the chance to play football, so to speak? And one reason the idea is attractive to just guaranteed income is that the system doesn't work for many millions of people. Many millions of people find the doors closed, and maybe this is some recompense for them. So if you look at actually the number of people in the workforce, it's diminished substantially. The jobs that are out there are often unappealing. And then I think this is where the efficiency issue comes in, that people, they want to get basic money to live on, and the way they go about it is extremely inefficient. So there's a lot of workers' comp arrangements, and then the demographics occur when people say, well, there's an argument to have children here, often out of wedlock. There's government stipends for this, and this is the way I can make it work. And it just turns out to be extremely inefficient. Or you get into things, people slip and fall, they do this, they do that, because there's sort of a hopelessness out there. The idea would be, well, if people had some money, they would feel liberated and they wouldn't take these steps. Now, I'm not sure that's the case, but that's the argument.
Well, I guess what you're arguing, or what you're implying, is that, and tell me if I'm right about this, that if we went to a guaranteed basic national income, we would largely, by and large, do away with many of the current entitlements as we now know them.
That's right. That would be the quid pro quo.
And I would say good luck with that. I think a few years ago, and I forget who it was, it may have been Biden, I'm not sure, it may have been Obama, talking about the idea of incorporating a national value-added tax. And of course, they would say, well, we would then be able to do away with things. We'd be able to reduce income taxes. We could go to a flat income tax. And my response to that is, well, will you put that in writing? During the debates on the National Income Tax Amendment, the 16th Amendment, a little over 100 years ago, there were many comments on the floor of Congress to the effect that, well, this will only be about 4%. It'll max out at 3, maybe 4%. And of course, nobody got it in writing. The text of the 16th Amendment says nothing about maximum rate of 4%. Income taxes have risen in our past on occasion to an excess of 90% on the upper income brackets. So I would want to see any sort of enabling legislation doing this would have to do both of these at the same time. And then once the basic stipend is in place, I would be very interested to see how long it took before some element pushed for bringing the traditional entitlements back in.
Well, you know, some of the quid pro quo on this is just some of the entitlements go away. One example where it sort of works is in Sweden, where if you lose your if a surgeon cuts off the wrong foot, or if you're trapped in an elevator and the elevator takes the wrong foot off, whatever the story is, however you lose your foot, there's just one number for it.
Yeah.
So lost foot, no matter how it happens, you get a stipend from the state.
In other words, it's the old Verguild system come back from
right.
1,000
Well,
years
that's right.
ago.
Yes, that's right. Even if you're a big dog, your foot's still the same as a little dog. So
Yes.
but in any event, that somehow diminishes, allegedly, diminishes some of the conflicts in litigation. And the other idea would be, presumably, that this would. Maybe it would. I'm not sure this is the case, but people might say maybe this will diminish litigation. People will not feel that they have to pursue things as much. And the idea would be that using the quid pro quo to balance things out. So I'm not sure how well that would work. Your comments on that?
Well, I'd say the idea of a foot being a foot being a foot is I think very much in the idea of price controls. It's an artificial ignoring of the realities of the world, and in such it creates inequities, and those inequities at some point are going to blow the lid off. For instance, I'm a writer, and as a writer, and actually all my books except the very first, I have written longhand with a fountain pen. My first book also wrote longhand, but I had not discovered fountain pen at that point. Now, that doesn't mean I'm a Luddite. I build computers and I type in my manuscripts after that. But that means that my right hand is very important. Now, people's hands are important. Manual laborers, you as a surgeon. But, for instance, what about dancers? Perhaps their hands are less important than their feet. But
soccer players.
Yeah, soccer players. You know, so I can imagine a circumstance where one person's hand, just based on his talents, based on his skills and experience, is quantitatively, qualitatively more valuable to him and to society than another person's hand. And so you're just going to, by fiat, say, no, that is not true. What do you get with that?
Well, I mean, I guess we're trying to get some social peace out there. And so the idea is we have this complicated world, and the arguments out there, the inequality is increasing. So people are saying the capitalist system is doing that. And there's kind of a new communism, I guess, out there saying that this system is unfair, which is a word that's often used, and I think we'll hear it in American political discussions, unfair. How do you make it fairer? And one thing is to income redistribution.
Yeah.
So more income redistribution, and this is a part of that. This is part of the idea that. And I think we need some degree of income redistribution. And the question is, what is the degree and how do we go about it? And I do think this is a real problem, is the way that it's happening now it could be done in a better way.
Yes.
And it's causing people to do extreme things to get their share of the pie.
Yes. Well, I think one thing is very important to point out, and I would hope, and this is something that if you listen to the talking heads, if you listen to the politicians in Washington, especially the ones from safe seats who are playing to their own people, something that we don't hear enough of. I would hope, and I would almost presume, that all people of goodwill out there on both sides want the same thing, that we want all children to have a hot lunch, we want everyone to go to bed without being hungry, we want everyone to have opportunities, and the problem is that we differ on our views of how to get there. Now, maybe there are outliers there that genuinely want certain groups or certain races to die and to have nothing, and we've seen that throughout history. But granted that, given that, there are still some big problems. So we talk about fair. What is fair? A lot of times, many people say, and this was one of President Obama's favorite phrases, that all he wanted was for people to get their fair share. So for our first step, what is fair? Before we take another step, we have to define that, I think.
Well, obviously, what's fair is the way you construe the word, and each
Yes.
person has their own way they construe it. So if, I don't know, it's fair that if you are under 4 feet in height, that you get some special treatment, or if it's fair that if you make $1 million on the stock market, you don't have to pay taxes, or whatever. It depends on your individual set of circumstances as to what you, but in general, it goes into self-interest. So what we're really saying is, what is the, I will cater to your perceived self-interest. And that's where the collision happens in a democratic system, is it not? But particularly, as the government has the power to make things fair, i.e., adhere to certain viewpoints that favor certain classes of people.
Yes. Well, I must say, I don't have a lot of experience with children. I have some. And in my experience, when a child tells me that's not fair, usually, not always, but usually it has meant I didn't get what I wanted.
Yes.
And, you know, with my background, that is my definition of fair. Equality of opportunity, I suppose, would be my definition of fair. I'd have to cogitate on that.
Now, maybe I'll pursue this point a bit, Bucky. You mentioned that everybody wanted everyone to have, I guess, enough to eat, and they want shoes on their feet. The question is, do we limit that at the Rio Grande, or anywhere in the world? So if there are millions of people out there without shoes on their feet, is there an entitlement, and it's a moral question to ask, or is there a responsibility of developed countries or rich countries to give people shoes to wear, or to let them into their domain where they get part of the income redistribution, which is a big deal, isn't it? If you look at some of the debates over immigration, I think there are sort of two all generalizations are odious, but I'll make this one. Two sort of classes of immigrants. One are the people that are coming in with high-tech degrees, PhDs. India is a favorite example. Really, their intellect can add a lot to the country. And another set of people are just desperate, that are seeking the benefits of being here, the Statue of Liberty, welcoming the huddled masses. That's the traditional psychological underpinning of the country. So millions and millions of people are doing everything they can to come in. And do they have entitlements? And should they receive some of the, if we had this guaranteed national income?
Yes.
Where should it stop? I mean, it would presumably, it would be sort of a two-class arrangement. And the big moral dilemma is, if you have some kind of entitlement as an American citizen, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean that if you obtain citizenship, somehow you get it? Is there a quid pro quo to obtain it? Your descendants entitled to this? And is the crowd getting more and more? There's not enough to go around, and so is there always going to be more goods to distribute? That's some of the difficulties the country is facing.
Yes. Well, when you come here by whatever means, even if you come here illegally, you instantly do get entitlements, political entitlements, that even illegal aliens in many circumstances have due process rights. Because due process rights, by giving you due process rights, it does not reduce my due process rights at all. You could say it actually protects my due process rights. So political, civil liberties yes, once you cross that border, you were extended those. And I think that's one of the greatest things about the Western, the Anglo-American tradition, the idea of the rule of law, equality of opportunity, equal treatment under law. But when you move over to material entitlements, well, that is a limited resource, and that's where the problem comes in. The United States by itself cannot, with its material resources and its economic resources, arrange to feed the entire world. I'm not even sure if the Western developed world as a whole is able to do that. I think what we can do is to use our resources to teach the rest of the world to fish. And I think that would be the kind of stewardship that is sustainable and that would raise all the boats.
Well, okay, on that note, thank you, Bucky. It's been a stimulating conversation, and we'll talk some more.
Indeed.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.